I wasn't even wearing shoes. I ran out of the house in my socks the second my phone buzzed with my son Marcus's text. Dad, Riverside parking lot behind the old mill. Please come. Can't drive. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. I called him back 4 times. Straight to voicemail every single time. I grabbed my boots by the door, didn't bother lacing them, and drove my pickup 17 miles through the back roads of Dawson County, Georgia, doing 60 on roads meant for 35. The old textile mill had been shut down for a decade. Nobody went out there except teenagers looking for trouble and fishermen heading to the Etowah River. When I pulled into the gravel lot, I saw Marcus's truck parked crooked under the one working streetlight, driver's side door hanging open. I found him slumped against the rear tire on the passenger side, hidden from the road. My son is 31 years old, 6'2", built like his mother's brothers, broad shoulders, strong jaw. But sitting there in that gravel lot, he looked like he was 8 years old again, the night he fell out of the magnolia tree and broke his collarbone. His lip was split wide open. His left eye was swollen shut, already turning that sick purple-black color. His shirt was torn at the collar, and when I knelt down and pulled it aside, I could see boot-shaped bruises forming across his ribs. "Who did this to you?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage, which wasn't very steady at all. Marcus opened his one good eye and looked at me, and what I saw there wasn't just pain. It was something I hadn't seen in him since he was a kid getting picked on at school. It was shame. "Vivian's father," he said. "He brought men with him, 3 of them. They were waiting for me when I left the restaurant." "Gerald Ashworth did this?" Marcus nodded, then winced. He said if I didn't sign the papers by Friday, next time they'd make sure I couldn't walk, he said. Marcus stopped, swallowed. His hand went to his ribs, and he grimaced. He said Elena doesn't need a mongrel father. He said no Ashworth heir is going to have Negro blood. I've been a mechanic for 43 years. Owned my own shop since I was 29. I've rebuilt engines that people said were beyond saving. I've straightened frames that looked like twisted metal. My whole life has been about fixing what's broken, making things run right again. But kneeling in that gravel lot, looking at my son's battered face, something inside me didn't want to fix anything. Something inside me wanted to break things. Break them badly. "We're going to the hospital," I said. "And then we're going to handle this. All of it." I helped Marcus into my truck. He groaned with every movement, holding his ribs like they might fall apart if he let go. On the drive to Dawson County General, he told me everything, and I mean everything. The things he'd been hiding from me for nearly 4 years. Marcus had married Vivian Ashworth 3.5 years ago. Vivian was white, from one of those old Georgia families that still had a plantation house they called a heritage estate. The Ashworths owned half the commercial real estate in 3 counties. Gerald Ashworth sat on the bank board, the hospital board, the county planning commission. Everybody in Dawson County either owed Gerald a favor or owed Gerald money. Usually both. When Marcus first started dating Vivian, I'd had my concerns, but not about race. I worried because the Ashworths were rich, and we were working people, and in my experience, that gap causes more problems than any difference in skin color. But Vivian was sweet, genuine, and she loved my son in a way that was obvious to anyone with eyes. So I gave them my blessing and hoped for the best. What I didn't know, what Marcus had been carrying alone for years, was that Gerald Ashworth had been trying to destroy their marriage from day one. The emergency room doctor confirmed 3 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in his cheekbone, and a mild concussion. While Marcus was getting scanned, I sat in that waiting room, and he told me the rest through the curtain. "It started before the wedding," Marcus said, his voice flat, like he was reading a grocery list instead of describing 3 years of hell. "Gerald offered me $200,000 to walk away. Said Vivian was confused, that she'd grow out of it. I told him no. Vivian and I got married at the courthouse because Gerald refused to pay for a wedding and told Vivian's mother he'd cut the whole family off if she attended. Patricia didn't come to your wedding? She came. Gerald didn't speak to her for 2 months after. Made her sleep in the guest house. That's the kind of man he is, Dad. It got worse. After the wedding, Gerald used his connections to get Marcus fired from his engineering job at the county water department, made a phone call, and suddenly Marcus's position was eliminated due to budget cuts. When Marcus found a new job at a firm in Atlanta, Gerald contacted the firm's biggest client, threatened to pull their business unless they let Marcus go. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I asked. "Because I knew what you'd do, and I didn't want you getting hurt. Gerald has people. He has the sheriff playing poker at his house every Thursday night. He has judges who vacation on his lake house. I thought if I just kept my head down, worked hard, proved myself, he'd eventually accept me. Marcus paused, and I could hear him struggling with the next part. 6 months ago, Vivian got pregnant. Elena. We named her Elena Grace. She was born 8 weeks ago. I sat up straight. My son had a daughter. A granddaughter I didn't know about. Why didn't you tell me I had a granddaughter? Because Gerald told Vivian that if anyone in my family came near the baby, he'd file for emergency custody. He has a judge who owes him. He said he'd prove we were unfit parents. He's been building a case, Dad. He hired a private investigator to follow us. He's been documenting every time Vivian looked tired, every time the house was messy, every time Marcus raised his voice even slightly. He told Vivian he'd take Elena and she'd never see her again unless she cooperated. Cooperated with what? The divorce papers. Gerald had his lawyer draft them 3 weeks ago. Full custody to Vivian. Supervised visitation only for me, and only at a location Gerald approves. Plus, a non-disclosure agreement. I can never talk about the Ashworth family publicly. Ever. That's why Gerald's men had beaten my son in a parking lot. Because Marcus refused to sign those papers. Because my son loved his wife and daughter too much to just walk away. The doctor discharged Marcus at 2 in the morning with a prescription for painkillers and instructions to rest. Marcus wasn't resting. Neither was I. I drove him to my house, the same house I'd lived in since 1987, the house where I raised Marcus and his sister after their mother passed from breast cancer in 2004. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the one I built from reclaimed oak the year Marcus was born, and I made him coffee while I thought. "Where's Vivian right now?" I asked. "At the house. Gerald has someone watching. Not officially. His assistant, a man named Dale Roper. Dale shows up every day around 4, parks down the street, watches the house until I come home from work. If I'm late, Gerald calls Vivian to ask where I am. And Elena? Elena's with Vivian. She's healthy, Dad. She's beautiful. She has Mom's smile. My late wife, Denise. Gone 22 years now, and Marcus still saw her in his daughter's face. I had to close my eyes for a second. "We're going to fix this," I said. "But we're going to do it right." Here's what Gerald Ashworth didn't know about me. He didn't know that 43 years of running a mechanic shop in a small southern town means you know everybody. Every single body. I fix cars for teachers, lawyers, nurses, police officers, reporters, city council members, and 2 different state legislators. I've never charged a veteran full price in my life, and every Christmas I fix up old bicycles for the children's home. People in Dawson County trust me. They trust me because I've earned it. 1 oil change, 1 honest invoice, 1 handshake at a time for 4 decades. Gerald Ashworth had power. But I had something he'd never understand. I had community. The next morning, I made my first call. My old friend Jimmy Delgado, retired Dawson County Sheriff's deputy, who'd been coming to my shop since 1991. "Jimmy, I need to file an assault report, and I need it handled by someone Gerald Ashworth doesn't own." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, then said, "You want GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They don't answer to county politics. I still know a senior agent. Woman named Priya Patel. She's out of the Atlanta field office. Tough as nails, and she hates corruption more than she hates traffic on I-85. I called Agent Patel that afternoon. She listened to everything. I could hear her pen scratching on paper, taking notes. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Jenkins, what you're describing isn't just assault. If Gerald Ashworth used his position on public boards to interfere with your son's employment, that's potentially abuse of public office. If he's using a judge to threaten custody proceedings as leverage, that's obstruction of justice. And if he's having your son surveilled and intimidated to force a legal agreement, that's coercion and witness tampering. So what do? You do nothing yet. You let me make some calls, and you get me every piece of evidence you can find. Text messages, emails, financial records, anything that connects Gerald to the assault and to the pattern of harassment. Can you do that?" I said I could. That night, while Marcus slept in his old bedroom down the hall, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch and called my daughter, Alicia, who lived in Savannah. Alicia is a paralegal at a civil rights law firm. When I told her what happened, she went silent. For so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dad," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled fury. I've been waiting 3 years for Marcus to tell someone. I knew something was wrong. Vivian called me once, 2 years ago, crying. She said Gerald told her the marriage was an embarrassment and that any children would be genetic mistakes. Her exact words, "Dad, genetic mistakes." I begged Marcus to let me help. He said he had it under control. He doesn't have it under control anymore. No, he doesn't. I'm calling my boss tonight, Sharon Whitfield. She handles exactly this kind of case. Hate-motivated domestic interference, civil rights violations, conspiracy. She's won cases against people a lot more powerful than Gerald Ashworth. I also need you to do something else, I said. I need you to talk to Vivian. She needs to know she has family on this side too. She needs to know she's not alone. Alicia drove up from Savannah the next day. She went to see Vivian while Dale Roper was on his afternoon surveillance shift. But Alicia, smart as her mother ever was, didn't go to the front door. She went through the back neighbor's yard and came in through the kitchen, where Dale couldn't see her from his car. What Alicia found confirmed everything and added layers I hadn't imagined. Vivian was a wreck. She'd lost 20 pounds since Elena was born. She'd been crying daily, and she had her own collection of evidence that she'd been hiding in a box under the bathroom sink. Letters from Gerald, dozens of them, handwritten on his personal stationery with the Ashworth family crest at the top. Letters telling Vivian she was a disappointment. Letters detailing how Marcus's African-American heritage would contaminate the Ashworth bloodline. Letters outlining Gerald's plan to eventually take Elena and raise her properly in the Ashworth household, where she would be taught to reject her father's side entirely. One letter in particular made my blood turn to ice. It was dated 2 weeks before the attack on Marcus. The situation with your husband has become untenable. I've arranged for some associates to deliver a message he won't forget. Once he understands the seriousness of his position, he'll sign. If he doesn't, I have other methods. A man with 3 cracked ribs doesn't work very well in an office. A man who can't work can't support a family. A man who can't support a family loses custody. It's simple mathematics. He'd planned it, written it down, signed it with his full name, Gerald R. Ashworth III. The arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Alicia photographed every letter. Vivian also gave her access to her phone, which contained text messages from Gerald spanning years. Threats, manipulation, racial slurs he was too careful to put in writing to Marcus, but had no problem sending to his own daughter. He called Elena the half-breed in 3 separate messages. He referred to Marcus as the situation so consistently, it had become his code word. We also found something Vivian herself didn't fully understand. Bank records showing Gerald had been making payments to Dale Roper far beyond what a personal assistant would earn. $15,000 a month for the past year, and separate payments to a man named Curtis Webb, a local attorney who happened to be the same judge's former law partner, the judge Gerald had threatened to use for custody proceedings. Agent Patel received all of it within 48 hours. She called me back on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear the intensity in her voice. "Mr. Jenkins, I've been doing this for 19 years, and I want you to know that the evidence your family has gathered is exceptional. We're opening a formal investigation. Gerald Ashworth is going to be charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, coercion, obstruction of justice, and abuse of public office. The judge he's been colluding with is going to be referred to the Judicial Qualifications Commission, and Dale Roper and the 3 men who attacked your son are going to be charged as co-conspirators." "How long?" "We execute warrants next week, but I want to coordinate with your daughter's law firm on the civil side. If we time this right, we can hit him from every direction at once." I liked the sound of that. I liked it very much, but I wasn't done, because I'd been thinking about something Marcus said, about how Gerald owned the county, how nobody would cross him because everybody owed him something. That kind of power doesn't just evaporate with an arrest. It takes something bigger. It takes sunlight. I called Deborah Watson. Deborah had brought her Buick to my shop every 6 months for 27 years. She was also the senior investigative reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I told her I had a story, a wealthy Georgia family patriarch conspiring to destroy his daughter's interracial marriage, hiring men to beat his son-in-law, threatening to steal his own granddaughter, all because he couldn't stomach the idea of black blood in his family tree. Deborah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How soon can I see the documents?" "Tomorrow, if you want." "I want." The story hit the AJC's website on a Thursday morning, the same day GBI agents arrived at Gerald Ashworth's heritage estate with arrest warrants. Deborah's article was meticulous. She'd verified every document, interviewed former Ashworth employees who confirmed the family's history of racial prejudice, and even found 2 previous girlfriends of Ashworth's sons who'd been paid off and pressured to disappear when the relationships became serious. Gerald was eating breakfast on his veranda when the GBI vehicles pulled up. According to Agent Patel, he actually laughed when they showed him the warrant. Said, "Do you have any idea who I am?" The body camera footage of that moment, which was later released during the trial, went viral. 8 million views in 3 days. Gerald Ashworth, in his silk robe, laughing at federal agents, then the laughter dying on his face as they read the charges. Dale Roper was arrested at his apartment. He cooperated immediately, gave up everything, named the 3 men who'd attacked Marcus, named the judge, provided recordings, actual recordings he'd secretly made of Gerald giving him instructions, because even Dale had enough sense to keep insurance against a man like Gerald Ashworth. Those recordings were devastating. Gerald's voice, clear and unmistakable, saying things like, "Make sure he can't work for a month. Break something he'll feel every morning." And Dale, "Remind him what happens to people who don't know their place in this town." The 3 men who'd beaten Marcus were arrested within hours, all local guys. 2 of them had records. One of them, a man named Bobby Sisk, had actually worked for me 15 years ago as a part-time helper in my shop. When I found that out, I sat in my truck in the driveway for 10 minutes, just breathing. Bobby Sisk, who I'd taught to change brake pads, who I'd loaned $50 to when his daughter needed school supplies. Bobby Sisk had beaten my son for $1,500. The judge, a man named Howell Clayton, was suspended within a week and eventually resigned. An investigation revealed he'd been doing favors for Gerald for over a decade. Reduced charges for Ashworth employees, favorable rulings in property disputes, custody arrangements that benefited Gerald's interests. His entire career was dismantled. But the civil case, that's where Sharon Whitfield earned her reputation. Alicia's boss was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice like honeyed steel. She filed suit against Gerald Ashworth personally, the Ashworth Family Trust, Ashworth Properties, LLC, Dale Roper, and all 3 attackers. The claims included assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil conspiracy, violation of civil rights under federal and state law, and tortious interference with family relations. Gerald's lawyers, a team of 4 from Atlanta's most expensive firm, tried every trick. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to seal, motions for change of venue. Sharon beat them on every single one. The case stayed in Dawson County. The documents stayed public, and the media kept covering every development. Gerald Ashworth made bail at $250,000 but was confined to his estate with an ankle monitor. His wife, Patricia, moved out 3 days after his arrest. She released a public statement through her own attorney that was exactly 1 paragraph long, but it said everything. She acknowledged that she'd witnessed years of racist behavior from her husband. She said she'd stayed silent out of fear and financial dependency. She said she was done being silent. She asked Vivian and Marcus for forgiveness. Vivian read that statement and cried for an hour. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. That phone call lasted 3 hours. I know because Alicia timed it. The criminal trial took place 7 months later. Gerald Ashworth walked into that courtroom in a tailored suit, looking like he owned the building. By the time the prosecution finished presenting evidence, he looked like a man watching his house burn down. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, coercion, obstruction of justice, abuse of public office. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Rosalind Carter, brought in from Fulton County to avoid any local conflicts, looked at Gerald over her reading glasses and delivered a sentence that made the courtroom gasp. 18 years. Gerald Ashworth, 67 years old, was going to die in prison. Bobby Sisk and the other 2 attackers received sentences ranging from 7 to 12 years. Dale Roper, who cooperated fully, got 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. The civil settlement came before the trial even finished. Sharon Whitfield had made it clear that she would expose every financial record, every business dealing, every skeleton in the Ashworth closet if it went to a full civil trial. Gerald's remaining attorneys advised settlement. The number was $14.8 million, paid from the Ashworth Family Trust and Gerald's personal accounts. Ashworth Properties was forced to divest its holdings in Dawson County, sold off to developers who actually invested in the community. Marcus used part of the settlement to start a scholarship fund at the local high school, named it after his mother, the Denise Jenkins Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing engineering degrees. First year, they funded 12 students. Marcus said it was the only good thing to come out of Gerald's money. But here's what I want to talk about. Here's the part that matters more than the trial, more than the money, more than watching Gerald Ashworth shuffled out of a courtroom in handcuffs. 10 days after Elena was born, before any of this had happened, before the attack, before the investigation, before the world knew Gerald Ashworth's name, my son had driven to my house on a Sunday morning. He'd carried a tiny bundle in a pink blanket and placed her in my arms without saying a word. I looked down at my granddaughter. She had Denise's smile. Marcus was right about that. She had Vivian's blue-green eyes. She had skin the color of warm caramel and a tiny fist that wrapped around my index finger and held on like she'd been waiting her whole 10 days of life to grab hold of her grandfather. I didn't know yet what Gerald had done, didn't know what he was planning. All I knew in that moment was that I was holding the most perfect thing I'd ever seen, and that anyone who thought this child was anything less than a miracle was out of their mind. Now, 15 months later, Elena is walking. Running, actually. Because she doesn't do anything slowly. She tears through my house like a tiny tornado, pulling books off shelves, chasing my old dog around the kitchen table, laughing so hard she hiccups. Vivian and Marcus bought a house 4 miles from mine. A modest place with a big yard that backs up to a creek. Marcus is working again, at an engineering firm in Atlanta that reached out to him after the story broke. They told him they'd been looking for someone with his qualifications, and they didn't give a damn who his father-in-law was. Vivian is back in school, finishing her teaching degree. She wants to work with special needs children. Patricia lives in a small apartment in town and comes over for dinner twice a week. She and Vivian are rebuilding their relationship slowly, carefully, honestly. Alicia comes up from Savannah once a month. She brings her 2 boys, and all 3 kids play in the yard while the adults sit on the porch and eat too much food. My porch, the one I built with my own hands 35 years ago, has become the center of a family that Gerald Ashworth tried to prevent from existing. Last Sunday, I was in my shop working on a rocking chair for Elena's 2nd birthday. Maple wood, hand-turned spindles, sanded so smooth it feels like silk. I was fitting the runners when I heard the screen door open and the patter of tiny feet on concrete. Elena toddled into the shop, grabbed my pant leg, looked up at me with those blue-green eyes, and said, "Papa, fix." I picked her up, sawdust and all, and held her against my chest. She put her little hand on my cheek, right on the stubble, and giggled. "Yeah, baby girl," I said. "Papa fixes things. I think about Gerald Ashworth sometimes, sitting in his cell, and I wonder if he understands yet what he destroyed. Not my family. He didn't destroy us. He couldn't. He destroyed his own chance at this. At Sunday dinners and tiny hands and rocking chairs made with love, he could have had a granddaughter who called him Papa. He could have had Marcus, who's one of the best men I've ever known, as a son. He could have had all of it. Instead, he chose hatred, and hatred took everything from him, while love gave everything to us. The Ashworth Heritage Estate is a bed and breakfast now. Some couple from Vermont bought it and painted over the family crest on the gate. Gerald's name has been removed from every board, every building, every plaque in Dawson County. The bank renamed their conference room. The hospital took his portrait down from the donor wall. 40 years of influence, erased in 6 months. That's what happens when you build your legacy on hate. It doesn't just crumble, it gets dismantled by the very community you thought you controlled. But Elena is a legacy that will last. She'll grow up knowing her grandmother Denise through photographs and stories. She'll know her grandfather Gerald, too, as a cautionary tale about what happens when a man values bloodline over blood. She'll know that her father was beaten in a parking lot because he loved the wrong woman according to the wrong man, and that he didn't run. She'll know her mother chose love over money, chose truth over silence, and that choice cost her everything she'd grown up with, but gave her everything that actually matters. And she'll know that her papa, a 63-year-old mechanic from a small Georgia town, didn't need money or power or connections on any board. He just needed the truth, a phone, and 43 years of being the kind of man people trust. I want to say this clearly, because I need people to hear it. Racism doesn't always wear a hood or wave a flag. Sometimes it wears a silk robe and eats breakfast on a veranda. Sometimes it writes polite letters on monogrammed stationery. Sometimes it smiles at Thanksgiving dinner while plotting to destroy your family. The most dangerous bigotry is the kind that thinks it's civilized, the kind that calls itself tradition or legacy or family values. If you see it in your family, in your community, in your life, don't wait. Don't hope it gets better. Don't convince yourself that silence is peace. Silence is permission. Marcus was silent for 3 years, and it nearly killed him. Vivian was silent because she was afraid, and her silence almost cost her daughter a father. Speak up, get help, document everything, and remember that there are people out there, agents and lawyers and reporters and neighbors and mechanics, who will stand with you if you have the courage to ask. Gerald Ashworth thought he was untouchable because he had money and power and a name that opened doors. But in the end, a mechanic, a paralegal, a retired deputy, a GBI agent, a journalist, and a civil rights lawyer took him down with nothing but the truth and the willingness to use it. Elena won't remember any of this. She's too young. But one day, when she's old enough, we'll tell her. And I hope what she takes from the story isn't the hatred. I hope it's the other part. The part where a whole bunch of imperfect people looked at a baby girl with blue-green eyes and warm caramel skin and said, "She's ours, and we will fight for her." That's my story. That's my revenge. Not fists, not fury. Just a family that refused to be erased and a community that refused to look the other way, and a little girl who says Papa fix and doesn't know yet that she already fixed me. She fixed all of us.